There was a day last year where I
Okay.
got some of the biggest heart palpitations of parenting to
Oh
this
yeah.
day. And look, I'm going to tell you a little bit about that story later,
I'll
but
tell
we're
you
talking
something,
about
Palile,
children,
before you
yeah?
get into it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Why, when you say there was a day, I'm actually having flashbacks now.
Yeah. Yeah,
In grade 3 or standard 1,
yeah, yeah.
right? I still remember my first crush. I was in standard 1. I think I was 7 years,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Think about it. I'm 7 years old. There's this beautiful girl called Nonhlanhla,
Eish,
a
nonhlanhla.
Zulu chubby girl. And then there was another one 3 years later, Nondumiso.
Hey.
She had this straight hair. You know, when you used to straighten your
Yeah,
hair,
yeah,
she used to flap it in the air. It was very slow how it was. I'm telling you, those two women to this day are still my reference of
yeah.
beauty as a 40-year-old. I
Yeah.
have not looked left or right. Every time I think of the template of that beautiful woman, it's Nonhlanhla and
Oh,
Nondumiso.
you know what? As our children grow, one of the most emotional milestones that we have to face as parents is when they start dating. And
Yeah.
whether it's your firstborn or your youngest, watching them explore romantic relationships can bring a mixture of excitement, concern, and some heart palpitations as well. How do you balance that as a parent, right? Giving them independence while still providing guidance and support as they go through the milestones that are natural in their lives. Gone are the days where parents would just we used to just say you can't do this, you can't date
Sure.
until you're 50, full stop. Now we're starting to have more conversations with our children and trying to embrace those milestones in their lives while trying to be the guiding force. It's not as easy as it sounds, and our parenting coach here on the Move, Ayanda Tetyana, is here to help us navigate this in our parenting and family corner once again. Ayanda, it's always a pleasure to chat to you. How are you doing?
Hi, and good morning to the listeners.
Hey,
Yeah,
Ayanda.
Ayanda. Look, Ayanda, I have gone through some heart palpitations. My son is almost 19
Yeah,
years
he's a big
old.
boy now.
He's a big boy now, and I'm sort of a little bit of an empty nester now, but it doesn't mean it gets any easier, especially when they start growing and you see them start doing the things that you gave your own parents heart palpitations for when you were younger. Let's chat
Oh
about this,
yeah,
Ayanda.
so firstly, just to add, because you mentioned how parenting gets more and more complicated, I think it's very important that as parents we understand that we are meant to navigate our roles as our children grow older. So you're not meant to be a frontline, if I could use that term. So this is how I usually think of it. So between the age of 1 till about 9, you're running around, making sure you're removing fires, making sure your children don't fall over things. But once they get to that 9 and the preteens to their teen years, you want to let them explore more and experience more things so that they can start applying their own minds. And I always think of it as almost becoming more of a support staff instead of your like frontline staff. This will allow you not to feel overwhelmed, number one, as a parent, but it will allow your children to start full experience that will empower them so that as they grow older, they start being able to learn from their mistakes. I think what really makes it harder is if we keep that frontline staff and we're running around all over them almost their whole life, their teenage into their adolescence, then we also don't get to enjoy our own lives as well. And they
Mhm.
don't get to learn and then they keep making the same mistakes as well.
Look, kids are kids. I mean, I was just using an example of when I was 7 years old. I used to love Nonhlanhla, and I still know Nonhlanhla, how she looks right now. I haven't seen it in years, but I'm sure if I saw her around the corner like Joe's, I'd say, hey, Nonhlanhla, how are you? But look, it's very young. I mean, when I think of myself, my first little crush, it was an innocent crush, right? I don't think it's involved with any kind of dark feelings or any dark intentions, right? It's pretty innocent. And someone would say, "Aye, that's
Yeah.
too young, 7 years old." No, 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 no. That's not the time to start speaking to them about dating or about just being in a relationship. That's the tricky part, isn't it?
Yeah, so you got to understand the development pretexts in terms of what's happening. So if you're looking at your young child, I think I had mine when I was like 6 maybe,
Hmm.
and I remember that this person was like the father to all my dolls and stuff. So you have your normal you have your normal crushes. We're talking your fantasy, admiration, got to get to your role play. And then obviously it gets a little bit more complex when we're going through to the preteen to the teen stages. That's where, depending on the context of where you live, that's where they may have some type of early dating experience. But for me, it's really important because when we're talking about identity exploration, this is a part of this experience that our children are learning. And I suppose what's really important is that we are constantly having conversations with our children as they're going through this, so that we can constantly give them the emotional vocabulary. Your child will start having these ideas, this intense emotional feelings towards someone. They may be male, female. You want to be there as part of that leading, and then it's just also like a sense of belonging. The reality is, social media does influence what becomes very pretty or handsome in terms of what our children are exposed to. So in the contexts of what schools they go to, who they are looking at, like it's just, but we want to constantly be having those conversations so that we can guide them through the heartbreaks. I'm thinking my daughter had a crush on someone and then saw them have a girlfriend with whomever, and she's 12. She thought her heart was going to break and her whole world was falling apart.
She almost died.
And then the guiding through those conversations to say, listen, and it's, for me, it's equally important to talk about the importance of, you may like this person, but they may not like you as well. And then you have a whole lot of other people who like you that you don't necessarily like. So being able to understand the dynamics of consent, the dynamics of bodily autonomy, this is why for me it's so important for us to have these conversations and be part of that experience with our children. And I know it's scary because, usually we're thinking the worst thing that could happen, pregnancy. But there's a way in which we can guide our children through that by being very open with them, by being part of their experience and being involved, so that even if I'm having a conversation to tell my daughter, you may not have a boyfriend, for instance, until you're 18. I am very explicit in my reasoning as to why. I'm openly communicating those things. I mean, I think most parents wish you could, especially if you have a daughter, you want to keep them a virgin until they're 40.
Yeah. A lot of us sorry, continue.
But the reality is they do have to have those experiences. They do have to figure out how to get romantically involved, what's the healthy relationships. And I also want to speak to the importance of us being intentional about how we model healthy relationships. So if you are a father, how do you treat your wife? How do you treat the mother of your children? Being beautifully romantic, opening doors for her, gives your children that thing to say, that's the kind of man I want. Look at my father. My father, the most beautifully romantic, and then your children, daughters particularly, will not settle for anything less. Your sons will go up and look at that and say, this is how you love a woman. So it's very important that when we get involved in toxic relationships as well, we identify those things and we work and heal ourselves so that we know that we are modeling the correct ways to be involved and romantically involved.
That is a very important part of development. Yeah. Ayanda, we need to take a break. We'll come back and continue speaking about this. It's the milestones are happening for your children, but the milestones are also happening for you as a parent as well, because you're also learning and growing with the experience. So I want us to get into that. And of course, how to, allow independence while also guiding, which is quite important as a role in the parenting. It's 11:21 Central Africa time. We're speaking about what your role is as a parent when your child starts dating, and of course how to navigate all those feelings. It's also on our On The Move poll at Channel Africa 1.
Ukatili wa kijinsia unaharibu maisha na kutenga jamii. Hutokea nyumbani, shuleni, kazini na mara nyingi kwa ukimya. Lakini hauwezi kuendelea. Ukiona, ongea. Ikiwa unaumia, funguka, kwa sababu kutofanya lolote sio chaguo. Sikiliza vituo vyote 19 vya redio kuanzia Jumatano ya tarehe 23 Julai kwenye mijadala, ushauri, tamthilia, maonyesho ya elimu na mahojiano na wataalam, manusura, watunga sheria na nchi nzima iliyoathirika na ukatili wa kijinsia kwenye vituo vyako pendwa vya redio. Piga simu 0800 428 428 ili kuripoti unyanyasaji au kupata msaada. GBV ikomeshwe na wewe. Ujumbe huu umeletwa kwenu na shirika la SABC.
Benjamin Moshatama and Palesa on the move.
Hey, I'm just thinking about it. Dating is just hard enough being an adult. Imagine now thinking about your child entering the streets.
We've been there. We've all been there, you
Well,
know.
that's what we're talking about today. How do you introduce your kids to relationships or even dating? Or should you? That's the big question that we're asking. And we're joined by Ayanda, Tetyana, who's joining us, a parent coach. Ayanda, when do you start speaking about not the birds and the bees, but just the idea of, hey, you're going to be attracted to someone else. You're going to like that. That's what this feeling means. How do you do that appropriately?
So, okay, I think what I found to really work is to navigate this from a perspective of, as soon as the child has the cognition, to be able to understand individual characters. I found this works way better, where almost on a regular basis, when your child is like 5, 6, 7, you notice things that other people do. So we're talking when other people are being kind, when other people are being empathetic, when they're being respectful. This is now part of like teaching them this vocabulary, and very importantly, the concept of what are other people's characters. Because, I was actually reading some research about how do we fall in love, and apparently a lot of who we fall in love with has to do with our mothers or our fathers, and depending on our relationships,
Sure.
right? But in order for us to understand when we are leading towards a healthy relationship, once we understand the characters of people and the kind of people who we like, understand the concept around reciprocity, it makes it very easier to decide who to get into relationships with. And for me, raising a 12-year-old preteen, watching her understand those dynamics in her social circles, and pull away maybe from people who she doesn't like because they treat her badly or they're rude, is a very important step in building towards now, as she starts to prepare herself or develop towards that, intimate, pre-stage intimate, right? Like your crushes, and it is going to become much more easier for her when she starts to see the boy that she likes. Or, I'm not fussy about that boy or girl. It's our kids have to explore their identities.
Right.
She will then be able to understand that. And as I prepare her for that, it's very important that I'm always talking about this emotional vocab. And how that looks like is every day having conversation on what was the best part of your day, what happened today. Oh, somebody said something that made me feel bad. Somebody said something that made me feel excited. Having those kind of conversation empowers them. I, as a parent, I am the best place to do that, because when I have those conversations openly with them and I talk about some of my disappointments and some of my excitements, I'm showing them this actual healthy emotional vocab and the actual dictionary to the vocab, so that as they slowly navigate in their own world towards finding their little crushes and their early dating experiences, they already are equipped with this very important, almost like a flag that says to them, this is how this will work. This is how this person is making you feel. Is this a good? And it will start from other things, not necessarily from the relationship, but how they navigate their relationship with their peers, for instance.
That is so true. And I'm glad you mentioned this, because it's so important to realize that an open conversational relationship with your child could be the difference between finding out, something bad that took place within that milestone or that journey they're going through, and also just having constant interaction. It is such a pleasure for your child to be able to come to you first when they're experiencing these milestones, versus them saying, oh, my parents or my mom or my dad dad is going to shout at me. So I better keep this a secret. And where there are secrets, some things that are bad may happen because there isn't an opportunity to actually guide your children. How do you create that open conversation and that place, a safe space for your children to come and tell you about their dating lives, their crush lives, and their dating milestones, so that they don't have to just tell their friends who know just as little as they do?
Yeah, I mean, if you hear some of the nonsense ideas that the children come up with in the playground, and I mean, we all come from different families have different values, belief systems, so our children will have all this information. So you want to be the person who's like their first and most accurate source of information. So for me, I'll always say to my parents, don't panic, breathe, okay? Just breathe as deeply as you can, and then navigate it from a place of just listening. Okay, tell me more about that. Oh, that's interesting. What did you enjoy about that? What do you like about that person? Oh, I remember when my daughter had her first crush, and this person was very intelligent, and he was like the top of the class. And I'm like, okay, what do you think it feels like for you if he gets all this attention from girls? Just exploring her emotional intelligence and how she feels and how she sees things allows me to then have teachable moments, so that, let's say, for instance, we're watching TV or we're reading a book and something is coming up that leans towards something. Let's say I heard her have something that I don't necessarily agree with, but then I'll start probing into it. And I'm like, okay, so what do you think that feels like? So I remember there was this very viral video, that TikTok, where this little girl was being pushed away by a boy child, and then there's another boy child who was like trying to protect her, but she still chose the one who was pushing her away. I'd use that as a teachable moment to understand where she is in terms of her understanding. Does she understand things like somebody's hurting the other person? Does she have empathy? We use all these real life experiences just to betelela those teachable moments.
Yeah, I mean, I wish we had more time. We've actually run out of time. But also there's a point where you have to also trust, right, in your advice over the years as they get older, right? How do you let go a little bit and allow them to actually decide for themselves? Just as in a minute as we wrap up, Ayanda.
I think that's probably the hardest part. So you have to allow them, and you would have known your child a little longer. If you can see that in terms of certain things, your child is very reliable, I would say give them a little bit more leeway. But if you have seen that, listen, when it comes to certain things, this child may not be reliable, that's where you want to maybe continue holding a little bit tight. But I want to stress, Benjamin, the importance of us letting our children learn by burning their own fingers. That is literally the best way for our children to start learning and figuring out things. At some point, I mean, I've always been very intentional about this. I'm not always going to be in my kid's life. So I don't want to be the kind of parent who's always being there to give them opinions about things. But I want to be the parent who's a coach, who, even if in my absence one day, they will think, what would mom say? What would mom coach me in terms of the situation? I really want parents to do more of that in terms of understanding your individual child. Say, how do I coach my child so that in future, should there be such a situation, they'll be able to navigate it and almost have all those wisdoms and values that you've taught them. So that's probably like the thin line of understanding that we have to be very intentional about this parenting, and we don't want to always be the ones who they call, but we can impart on them knowledge that will assist them. And that is a partnership in terms of open communication, in terms of listening, in terms of giving advice, in terms of using teachable moments, in terms of asking them when they've made mistakes, what would you do differently, instead of shouting and screaming at them.
Yeah. Well, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure, Ayanda. And just one quick side note is that it doesn't matter if you have all these tools. It doesn't mean that as a parent, your heart won't be sore. So either way, you must also navigate your own feelings around that when it happens. It's always a pleasure. That's Ayanda Tetyana, a parenting coach, chatting to us about the balancing act between giving your children independence and providing guidance when they start dating.